Hey guys, what's up? Wesley Smith here. Yeah, I took some questions through Facebook and Instagram, and a lot of the questions were really too in-depth. Not too in-depth to where I don't understand how to give you an answer, but a lot of them deal with trying to address a specific issue for the person asking the question. And trying to answer that question with one sentence of information through an Instagram comment is really difficult, and it's honestly not what you want to be striving for as a lifter or coach, is to get that one specific answer. Because if you're able to understand the concepts that we address in these kind of videos, books like Scientific Principles of Strength Training, Thoughtful Pursuit of Strength, if you're able to understand those concepts, you're going to be able to answer those questions for yourself, for your clients, and give yourself the right answer today as well as next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because it's constantly changing as the qualifications of the lifters progress. So a lot of the questions that I got dealt with differences between beginner and intermediate and advanced training, and that's what I want to talk about right now, because it's not that the entirety of the program is gonna shift. That, let's say, a Juggernaut method is a good program for beginners or intermediate, and daily undulating periodization is good for advanced, or anything like that. It's what really changes is the scale of the programming, not the type of the programming. So I want to get into the differences between what beginners need, intermediate lifters need, and advanced lifters need, and help equip you guys with the ability to make informed decisions for yourself as you try and create the best training programs for yourself and your clients. So as we look here, the first thing we need to do is classify what is a beginner, what is an intermediate, and what is an advanced lifter. So for the purposes of this discussion, we'll say a beginner lifter is someone with less than 3 years of training and a class 2 or lower total. If you're looking for good classifications of totals, go check out the USPA website. They have, with sleeves, with knee wraps, single ply and multi-ply classifications on there, and I think they do a really good job of it. So that's beginner. Intermediate would be 3 to 6 years of training with a class 1 or a master total. And then an advanced lifter would be 6+ years of training with an elite or international elite total. And obviously there's also going to be lifters who are even further beyond this advanced. Myself, I've been training, quality training for about 15 years now, and both my total in sleeves and in wraps is about over 10% higher than even the international elite total. So that's just something to keep in mind, and I've talked about this before, is you don't necessarily want to look at the training that the best lifters are doing right now. You want to look at the training that the best lifters did to become the best lifters, and hopefully I'm going to give you some insight to that right now. So as you look at these three different groups, there are really two big differences that are going to come into play as things that you need to adjust for. The first is going to be muscle mass, all right? And the second is going to be overload frequency. That kind of goes hand in hand with maximum recoverable volume. So the idea of muscle mass, hypertrophy, how much lean mass the lifter is carrying. Let's say if we were going to take 10 220 class, so 100 kilo class beginner lifters, and 10 advanced, elite total 220 class lifters, and line them up next to each other. They would be really easy to pick out who's the advanced and who's the beginner simply by, well, one, probably all the beginner guys would be taller than the advanced guys, but so they're not carrying as much muscle on their frame. They're not short and as muscular as the advanced lifters. So as we look to move from beginner up to intermediate up to advanced, the most important thing you need to do is build more muscle. And that's done through hypertrophy training, and it's done through dedicating a greater proportion of your energy towards building muscle, towards hypertrophy training for beginner lifters rather than advanced lifters. So if we were given 6 months of training to be done, and we're going to break each of those months up into 4-week blocks. So 3 weeks of hard overload training and 1 week of a deload. And I'll make another video about when to deload, how to deload, why to deload. But So just for the purposes of this discussion, 4-week blocks, 3 weeks hard training, 1 week deload. Say for beginner lifters, they're going to want to do 3 hypertrophy blocks, 2 general strength blocks, and 1 peaking block. Intermediate lifters, 2 hypertrophy blocks, 3 strength blocks, 1 peaking block. Advanced lifters, 1 hypertrophy block, 3 strength blocks, 2 peaking blocks. Obviously, person to person, this is going to vary a little bit on their individual needs, but trying to make as good of a give you guys as good a general picture as possible. So organizing the training like this is going to give each type of lifter, each class of lifter, what they need to be most successful. It's going to dedicate 12 consecutive weeks to building muscle for the beginner lifter. Allow them to put on that quality mass, improve their leverages, start to fill out their frame so they can eventually be in the weight class that they need to be. And then for the advanced lifters, having the longer peaking block, and this could even maybe go out to 3 peaking blocks and only 2 strength, that's going to give them the time they need to get up to the heavier weights. So beginners don't need very long to peak because the difference between the weights they're using in a strength cycle and a peaking cycle, it's not that big of a difference, and the weights aren't as high, so they don't take as long to get up to. So let's say for me, in the strength cycle, maybe the heaviest I'm going to go is 785, maybe 800, but then in the peaking cycle, in the squat, I'm going to need to get up over 900 to be ready for the meet. So I have 100 to 125, maybe even 150 pounds of weight that I need to add to the bar. And it's very unlikely that I'm going to be able to do that in only 1 month of peaking training, with maybe three peaking workouts in the squat. The first one would have to be 830 and then 870 and then 910, where those are pretty big jumps. But it's more realistic for a beginner lifter to make those, to take their jumps, which are maybe 10 to 15 pounds and per workout over the course of a month to get to the weights that they need to be handling during a peaking cycle. Also, you don't want the peaking cycle for the beginner athlete to be as long because they don't have as much muscle mass, the exact issue that we're addressing right now, and because of that, they will not retain their fitness as long. More muscle mass, you're going to hold on to that fitness longer, so if they're going to decay that fitness too fast during a relatively low volume peaking block, you want to keep it shorter. While a more advanced athlete, more muscle, you'll be able to hold on to that fitness a bit longer. So as we look at, if the thing we're trying to do is develop hypertrophy, if that's the really important idea now, how do we do that? All right, so if we're to look right here, and hopefully you guys can read this, hypertrophy is developed best through 60 to 75% intensity work for sets of 6 to 12 reps and 15 to 30 total sets per week per exercise. So that 15 to 30 range, that goes along with the idea of MRV, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second. But most people are going to fall within that range. Certainly someone with really high MRV might be more. Someone with really low MRV might be less. I can't address this specifically for every single person that's watching and all of your friends that you know, but that should give you a good idea of where to start. And then the idea of how you break that up in the week is going to go to our next point, overload frequency. So overload frequency is really just the idea of how often can I train hard? And it goes to the heart of the question, and which is one of the most common questions I receive, and kind of in some ways one of the most frustrating or difficult to answer, given the information, the context of a Facebook or Instagram, comment, is how often should I squat or bench or deadlift? There's not a magic number here, all right? I could tell you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week and probably justify all of those as being right in certain situations or wrong in certain situations. So what we want to do is understand this concept of SRA, stimulus recovery adaptation, so you can make an informed decision for yourself and your athletes. So as we look at beginners, intermediate, and advanced, and the concept of overload frequency and SRA, all right? So SRA, stimulus recovery adaptation, I'm just going to call it SRA for the purposes of this. More beginner lifters should and can train more frequently than more advanced lifters because each hard training session they do, overload training session they do, all right, is less stressful to them. The beginner lifters training is less stressful to them than the advanced lifters. They're not able to induce the same levels of stimulus through their training because the weights aren't as heavy, all right? And that's because they're not as experienced. Their technique's not as good. They're not as good at recruiting motor units as the more advanced lifters, all right? So they're not able to get as much out of each training session, as well as they need more attention to their technique. And because their entire career has been shorter, every day that they take off, that they don't do a lift, represents a greater, portion of their entire lifting career, and their technique is going to decay more quickly just because they haven't done as many total, squats, benches, and deadlifts in their life. So if we were to look over here at the SRA curve, the red line that you see, that's going to represent the beginner lifter, and the purple line would be the advanced lifter. All right? Here's performance, and then this is time. So the stimulus, the training session, is going to drop them down here into fatigue. All right? Reduced performance because of fatigue. And the harder the training session is, the more stimulus the athlete's able to present themselves with, the deeper into fatigue they're going to drop. So the purple line is farther down here. But the time that it takes to recover and adapt to the training is largely dependent on genetics, and there are certainly other factors, lifestyle factors, pharmaceuticals perhaps, that could affect that. But if we're just looking at the same athlete as they progress through their career, beginner, intermediate, and advanced, they're probably going to recover and adapt in about the same time frame. So as we present that bigger stimulus, it's going to take a longer time to recover and adapt to it before you can do the next overload training session. So with that in mind, it goes right hand in hand with the idea of maximum recoverable volume. And that MRV is how much quality training can you do and recover from. So the more experienced lifter you become, the more fit you become, and it should be the more training that you can tolerate, the more total training, but that might need to happen over a bit longer time. And it's also going to happen through less sets, because if when you were a beginner you squatted 300 and now as an advanced you're squatting 600, you could do half the amount of sets and equal the same, the same total volume. So on paper it might look like they're doing less work, but the weights are so much heavier that the volume actually ends up being higher. Also, you want to take into account athletes who have more fast twitch muscle fibers are going to have relatively lower MRV, because fast twitch fibers recover slower than slow twitch fibers. And you guys want to make sure that you check out the video Overview of Recovery by Dr. Mike Israetel and Dr. James Hoffman on Strong 360. And also for the hypertrophy, you're going to want to look at Practical Programming for Hypertrophy, also by Dr. Mike Israetel, also on Strong 360. So if we're to just kind of summarize this idea of differences between beginner, intermediate, and advanced training, beginner lifters need more frequent training, longer duration of hypertrophy training, and a shorter peaking block. They're also going to need a broader pool of exercises to develop more general well-rounded strength, without losing sight of the need to develop the technical prowess in the competitive lift. And then advanced lifters are going to need less frequent, intense training. They're going to need a longer peaking cycle, and they're going to need that longer peaking cycle because they're going to need more focus, or more time to get up to those top weights, and more specific training. And peaking training is going to be inherently the most specific that they can do, because it's going to be the competitive movements at low rep ranges. And then, of course, intermediate lifters are going to kind of fall in between those two. So hopefully you guys learned something. Make sure follow us on Instagram at Juggernaut Training, at Chad Wesley Smith, on Facebook. Go check out jtsstrength.com. If you want to go more in depth on these about this kind of information, make sure to go to Strong 360 at 360.jtsstrength.com. Thank you very much.